Hey, UConn students. Today we're going to continue to look at nationalism and war. Hope you're doing well. Hanging in there. We're going to get some nice weather, get outside, socially distance, obviously, but get outside and enjoy it. Go for a walk. I'm going to go for a bike ride later today. I've been going up, basically start near the high school and actually start at Wolcott Tech, and I ride all the way up to Dairy Queen in Winston, and then turn around and come back. It's about, I don't know, 20, 21 miles, something like that, but it feels good. It gets a little narrow on Winston Road, though, in some places. But it's nice because I'm not near anybody, so I don't ride on the trail, I ride on the road, and put some podcasts in, things I'm interested in learning, and it's good. I keep one ear open, obviously, because I want to make sure that I know a car's behind me or something, and I don't have these big headphones on while I'm riding. But it's good, and when I'm done, I definitely feel like I did something. So, and I run too, so it takes the pounding off my body a little bit to do that too. But today, what I want to do, because we looked at World War I last time, and I think that's pretty clear, is how nationalism got us through the war, kept us out of the war. Remember, we talked about that, and then it got us into the war, and our culture really got behind it. Our government was perpetuating that nationalism. We were responding. People were at war. All of that. And so when we come back, now one of the things you hear on the news a lot, and it's true, is the Spanish flu happened at the end of the war. The war, of course, helped to spread that the way that it happened, but killed a massive number of people, more so than the war itself did. So that's always used as a warning. But we do know, 100 years later, we know a lot more about medicine and things like that. So that's good. And one of the things that we see at the end of the war is, okay, we got involved in this war. We tried to stay out of it. Now what? That was the war to end all wars, right? The only problem is we find out relatively quickly that peace is not something everybody's buying into, okay? So the war kind of ends. Germany, Austria-Hungary, like Central Powers, are on the losing end of this. And they stop fighting because they assume it's going to be a negotiated peace that's going to be somewhat equitable, okay? Or, there's going to be at least a negotiation that isn't going to be at the end of a bayonet, it's been called, right? So they have the Treaty of Versailles, something that Woodrow Wilson is very much in the center of. He's viewed as the hero of all civilization, really, at the time, because he was going to come in and work a peace out. That was going to work for everybody. The big thing for him was the League of Nations. He viewed that as the organization that would stop future war. It was a precursor to the United Nations. And allegedly, the United Nations was going to learn from the mistakes of the League of Nations, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But Wilson really wanted this League of Nations, with the United States playing a central role. So how does nationalism fit into this? Well, people had seen the death and carnage caused by World War I, and we're back to where we were prior to the start of the war in a lot of ways. We don't want any more fighting. We don't want any more war. We want to keep to ourselves. We want this isolation spirit. If we're going to be part of something like the League of Nations, people worried that we were now morally bound to another nation. If they were attacked and somebody was that now dragged us into it, okay? Where Congress is the institution that should declare war, we're now giving a bit of our sovereignty up to a collective group of nations. And so Wilson was uncompromising here because he really thought this was the way to go. It was his baby. And he gets a lot of pushback. And eventually they don't have the required majority, okay, which was 2/3 senators, to get this passed, okay? And so the United States never joins the League of Nations. The very thing that was supposed to kind of keep peace failed. And what does happen is the Treaty of Versailles is worked out, where Germany is blamed and is really punished for the war, from its ability to have an army, to be self-sufficient. Everybody's looking for a little payback, okay, monetarily and otherwise, and that's what happens. So we kind of, back off, and we want to go back to our own way of doing things. Okay, so you have the Roaring Twenties that begin in our nation, where this attitude of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die, which is really, people felt that, whether it was war or disease, people said, well, we're going to go out and have a good time in the meantime. Social boundaries were challenged, like women, hair, the traditional hairdo and dress length and things like that, where women went, that was challenged. You see African Americans generate a great culture in Harlem, and you see this burgeoning, this beginning, this explosion of a African American culture. Jazz music, Louis Armstrong, all that stuff was Duke Snyder, not Duke Snyder, sorry, Duke Ellington. Duke Snyder was a baseball player, but Duke Ellington. And you have just this massive music and cultural thing happening in Harlem. Well, the nationalism soon begins to really become manifest with something called the Red Scare. So if you remember that the Russians left World War I because they had a communist revolution in their country, and they suffered violent overthrow. There was, the Reds and the Whites, and eventually the communists went out in the Soviet Union and become the Soviet Union. And what that does is it scares people in our country. We have to take care of ourselves, protect our own. And you had organizations that were meeting at this time that were communist in nature, communist parties, communist gatherings, okay? And so one of the things that concerns us is the possibility that this communist movement could happen here and overthrow our government. Okay, so you had concerns about radical groups for really the entire part of the first part of the 20th century. You had anarchists, you had socialists, you had communists, all of which in some ways were involved in labor unions and movements and violence, to be honest with you. Remember, McKinley was assassinated by one of these extreme individuals. So violence is not something that was not unheard of, right? So the Attorney General Palmer decides that one of the things that should happen here, and under issues and activities, this is the Red Scare, and the question is, were the Palmer raids against suspected radicals justified or unconstitutional? Okay. Well, one of the things that happens is there's the 1918 Immigration Act. Okay, so if you remember, we just got out of war. Immigration had stopped because of all the fighting, virtually stopped because of all the fighting and the danger that came into play to move from one nation to another, especially across the ocean. So 1918 Immigration Act essentially argued that the government should arrest and deport any alien, okay, any foreigner who's advocating the overthrow of our government. So what you have here, inherent in Marxism, is this idea that the governments need to be overthrown because those who have power will not voluntarily give that up. The color of communism is red, which signifies bloodshed. So in fairness to policymakers throughout the 20th century, and I think people lose sight of this sometimes, we look at communism the way we look at it today, just another idea, right? Just another thing that you should be able to express. There's Communist Party today. We've seen injustices happen within the movement protecting us from communism, so that, of course, speaks to this. But we do lose sight of the fact that inherent in the system itself is this idea of overthrow, okay, violently if necessary. Now, there may be pushback on that where people would say, well, you don't have to violently, but Marx and others certainly viewed this as being necessary because nobody's going to want to give up their wealth voluntarily and have it redistributed, okay? So the immigrants that would be in favor of this can now be deported and arrested. Now, any immigrant or any foreigner that goes to any one of these meetings or is a member of this party is immediately targeted, right? You are in trouble. And Palmer himself, we call it the Palmer raids, he had a portion or an area near his property blown up. And some officials were subjected to bombings and violence and threats. So there was some real threats happening and some real, So after the war, given what happened in the Soviet Union, people got serious about this. Now, Issues and Activities looks at this idea, arguments in favor, obviously we're to keep our country safe, okay? If we had a terrorist group today that advocated the violent overthrow of our country, you'd feel that tension a little bit, right? Arguments against this was that you could arrest people without due process of law. Just because I go to a meeting, just because I like the idea of a redistribution of wealth, does that mean that I'm dangerous and need to be removed from the country? Can I make my defense? Can I give my point of view? Some of these issues go back to Guantanamo Bay with suspected terrorists. Okay, well, these were suspected communists. That there's varying degrees of this, right? So what does it mean? Well, due process, if you've got a massive number of people and you're not a citizen, even in some cases, in many cases, then they're going to be removed for safety reasons, right? And so these are the Palmer raids. And so Issues and Activities, if you want to focus on this a little bit, as far as this shows our nationalism, we're worried about our country, our pride or intense loyalty to our country comes in this case at the expense of radical groups. Okay, now a balanced view is that they were radical. There were some members that were being violent even against key officials in our country. The other side is, can people believe what they want to believe without being subjected to removal and arrest and without the due process of law? Can they defend themselves in the court of law? So all of these questions come up with the Red Scare, okay? Now, just know throughout the 20s and early 30s, obviously we have a depression. Now, we think of the Great Depression to Americanize. Understand that it was global, and a place like Germany really had it a lot worse because of all the punishment and the money they were paying the Allies, as well as the failure of their currency. And the Weimar Republic was not doing well. So the depression was really heightened in Germany. Where a place like the Soviet Union did okay, actually, from the figures that we can tell. They weren't as impacted because of massive industrialization and some other things that were happening there, okay? Now, so nationalism is seen between the end of World War I and the start of World War II, is seen through isolationism moving towards involvement in the war. Sound familiar? That's what happened before World War I. But early in like 1933, let's go way back there. So as the Nazis are just starting to gear up and ramp up and change things in Germany, Roosevelt recognizes the Soviet Union officially. So they were, if you think of it this way, we go about 15 years where we don't even acknowledge the legitimate existence of the Soviet Union, okay? We don't like the way that the communists came into power. We don't like the form of government. So we withhold official recognition. By 1933, we change our mind, hoping that they would become a customer of ours. We could sell to them. It would increase our economics. They were pretty poor. But during this time, what's interesting is nearly 100,000 people left the United States to go to the Soviet Union. And for the first time in American history, you had more Americans leaving this, or more people leaving this country than coming in. So that shows you how kind of bad things were here, okay? Now, something gets passed during the 30s called the Stimson, 20s and 30s, called the Stimson Doctrine. And this was the idea that you were not going to recognize any territory that was gained by force from another country. And he extends it to Manchuria, okay? So this is the time frame where Japan is being imperialistic. They're starting to expand into China and other places. So while we were isolationists, we're also saying we're also not happy with some of the things that are going on. A poll, an Omni poll, was conducted in 1935, and what it said was that 95% of Americans were isolationists. That's a huge number, okay? 95%. And so if you're the president, and remember that you can argue this, as you know, from We the People, but one of the clearest roles of the president is commander-in-chief. Okay? If you're to look in the Constitution and just take it at face value, it's the real, it's the one that's the most obvious and seems to be the one that is the most clear in terms of the primary role of the president. So if 95% of the people want to be isolationists, I don't think you're going to be an imperialist. Okay? You're going to feel that pressure. And remember that this was before there was a limit on presidential terms. So Roosevelt, okay, elected in 32, okay, is going to, so he's going to be reelected in 36, 40, 44, okay. So multi-term president here. And so he's going to honor that, all right. The Road to World, there was a book called The Road to War. And it was a book that argued that we basically got involved in World War I to manipulate it. Now we know George Creel, the propaganda machine, but also big companies did, corporations fueled this because they made money off the war. This is another ongoing theme throughout the 20th century. Okay, the industrial complex, military-industrial complex. The Steve Miller Band. You may know some of their songs, but they had a song called the Military-Industrial Complex Hex during the Vietnam era that talked about the idea that once war becomes a part of your economy, it feeds itself. It's like jobs are given, right? Corporations make money, workers are employed, and so this great machine just starts moving that is basically benefits from war, okay? And you have to be very careful when this happens. So people were thinking that they were manipulated into World War I, which pushes that isolationist fervor higher. Now, one of the things that happens, as you know, through the 1930s, is Britain and France become very concerned with the actions of Germany. Hitler basically ignores the Treaty of Versailles, moves troops into the Rhineland, builds up an army, does everything he's not supposed to do, and each step of the way he's watching to see what the reactions do. Well, it's isolationist. People are worried about their own country, so Hitler says, fine, I'm going to keep doing this until someone stops me. And throughout those years, he's expanding Germany, right? You see that he moves the troops into Austria, and Austria is united with the Germans to cheering crowds. People wanted it, okay? And then you see him do the same thing in the Sudetenland, okay? So to a world that is really struggling with financial matters and their own existence and unemployment rates, a bunch of people that want to be together, at least from what it seems on appearance, that's not going to be my highest priority. These people are cheering each other. They want to be united. You know, so be it. At least that's what our attitude was. France and England are a little more concerned because they've seen, this is not their first rodeo with the Germans, right? There's a history of animosity and territory, and they're smelling something that's not good here. Okay, so between 1935 and 1937, we passed something called the Neutrality Acts. We are warned, Americans are warned against traveling on ships flying the flags of war. Belligerent nations, and that term, if you're a belligerent nation, it doesn't mean you're a stupid nation, it means that you're at war, okay? So that meant that there was a cash and carry policy for all goods purchased through the United States, okay? You want stuff from us, you have to pay us cash and carry it on your own ships. We're not going to get out in the middle of this stuff again, okay? Now, the problem people had with this was that no American arms were sold and no loans from American banks. That was another part of this. Critics said, though, that aggressor nations bought from us before they became these, before they took these bad actions or they took over another nation. Okay? So they got money from us. The problem was the ones who were taken over or who attacked, sometimes secretly or didn't see it coming, they could now not get arms from us. So we're actually supplying these negative aggressive nations and not giving any help to the ones that really needed it. That's the argument, at least. Okay. And then just to show you that we weren't really neutral, Roosevelt announced that he was trading 50 old destroyers to the Brits in exchange for 8 naval bases in Bermuda and British naval colonies in the Caribbean. So we just can't help ourselves from kind of expanding a little bit, protecting ourselves, increasing our military bases. Even though we're not, getting involved in war, we are definitely not neutral players, just like we weren't in World War I. Then the Burke-Wadsworth Act is passed, okay, where we pay $37 billion, and this is in the 1930s. Think about how much money that is, to build up our Army and Navy and institute the first peacetime draft in history. One thing to be drafted during a time of war. This is now the first time during a peace that we have a draft, which signals that we don't want to be caught with our pants down, so to speak, if war breaks out. We want to be able to mobilize quickly. We want to be able to know. So going back to that military-industrial complex, the idea is now here that being militarily prepared for conflict is one of the things that we see as a necessity in our country. So rather than move away from war, as the 1930s move on, if you look closely enough, we're moving closer to being prepared for it. So someone is seeing the writing on the wall, and most would say it's FDR. So our nationalism comes in here with isolationism coupled with a nation that goes along with the draft during peacetime. Not without pushback. None of this is without pushback. But it's not this massive protest movement or anything like that. We have the Lend-Lease Act, where arms of all sorts were going to be loaned to Britain. And eventually we even extend this to the Soviet Union. And we end up giving $54 billion in aid. Okay. Now that is as things become more serious. So 1939, the world sees what Germany's up to. War is declared, and the world is at war. Okay. So that's where a lot of this is going to come into play. We actually send ships to waters between Iceland and North America. We help the British as they exchange fire with German subs up there. We have the USS Reuben James that's sunk, and 100 are killed. All right. So we have the submarine warfare again, and Americans still not staying out of it and dying. And so we've got this now clamor for maybe it's not time to be isolationists anymore. Okay. America's first committee is formed, where they are a strong isolationist group. Herbert Hoover, Charles Lindbergh is part of this. They looked at this as we're going to war to protect the British Empire. That's essentially what this is. That's their argument. And so they say, let them duke it out, let them fight it out, and then we'll side with whoever wins, right? We'll militarily, or I should say economically, benefit from whoever the winner is, okay? Roosevelt in 1940, this is also going to sound familiar to you, promises that no boys would be sent to fight in a foreign war. 1916, Wilson ran on a slogan that said he kept us out of war, right? Johnson Lyndon Johnson during the Vietnam War would make a famous statement like that too. We are not about to send American boys to fight a war that Asian boys ought to be fighting for themselves. Well, he ate those words because we did. And so the other thing that happens, and part of the nationalism that goes on, is we start to sacrifice as a nation to get ready for maybe what's inevitable. And I'll get into once war is declared in 1941 how things change. But people are starting to motivate. They're starting to mobilize in their minds at least. Okay, and certainly we see policies begin to move away from this isolationism. So if you want to look at nationalism during the 1920s and 1930s, I think the word protection is big because we're protecting ourselves. That's what it means to, intense pride or loyalty in your nation. You're not worried about protecting yourself, and I don't know what that is. So we're doing that through isolation, and then when necessary, we're doing it through sending money and equipment and supplies to our friends. Okay, so that's really what determines our nationalism at this time. Okay, the communism we're worried about. So that's where we're at with nationalism and war. Next time we'll talk about how we got involved in the war and what nationalism looked like then. Okay. So that's it for now. I miss you guys. Hang in there. And again, let me know if you need anything through email or anything else. Okay, we'll see you soon.